Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. A word we use to describe harmony and good voice leading is parsimony. Parsimony, it means being efficient or maybe being cheap, depending on how you use the word. What I want to talk about today is something my teacher called fractional chords. You don't need all the notes of a chord to get the job done. How many notes are in any given chord? Okay, I've got a D minor 7, G7 chord up here. And in the key of C, there's an argument to be made that there are, 7 notes in D minor 7. Certainly jazz musicians frequently conceive of their chords, even 4-note chords like D minor 7, as having extensions up and above the root, the 7th. We got the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. They sound great, and they're available to us for sure. But nobody really wants to play 7 notes in every chord, except me. How do we pare that down? Well, there's a couple of ways. Let's take a look at them. The great jazz pianist Thelonious Monk was famous for what's called a shell voicing. Here's D minor 7th. And if you look at the screen, you can see even the analysis program that I'm running that allows me to use the keyboard says this is D minor 7th. It's just the D and the C. And then if I move to G, this is G7 with the F in the bass. You can see the analysis there. I'm just using 3 notes there. I included a G and an F and a B. Now, the essential thing about this is that I'm including the fact that the 7th is falling down to the 3rd. In other words, the 7th of D minor 7th, there are all the notes. That voice drops down, and that voice becomes the 3rd of G7. It's an essential part of voice leading, to have 3rds and 7ths switching places. So here's the full version of it. And here's the parsimonious version of it. I'll just play the 3rds and the 7ths. Now, if you are lucky enough to have a bass player, that's enough. And that's my first example of a fractional chord. Now, I guess I should say that when I say fractional, I don't mean something that looks like this. See, it says E minor / G. It's called a slash chord when you do that, and it kind of looks like a fraction. And frequently you'll see your charts will have slash chords. It's suggesting that you have a triad or some note, and then a bass note underneath it. The special sort of motion of a bass line that might descend calls for a slash chord. No, I'm talking about cheating and using only a few notes from the chord. Well, here's my chord progression: D minor 7, G7, E minor 7, A7. Let's do some fractionalization of that chord. Okay, here are all the notes of the chord. E minor 7, and then an inverted A7, D minor 7, and then an inverted G7. Now, we're going to get rid of some of those notes, and we'll have, functionally speaking, everything that we need. So each of these has a root in the bass. So there's an E, an A, a D, and a G. And I'm going to, as a result, get rid of all the roots. I can get rid of the E there. I can get rid of the A there because I don't need to double things up. I can get rid of the D there, and I can get rid of the G there. Let's say goodbye. Goodbye. And I still hear the same progression. Really just sounds the same. By the way, this is flipped. I just am playing the harmonic highway. E is the 5 of A, which is the 5 of D, which is the 5 of G. Well, do I need, by the way, the fifths? As it turns out, I really don't. I can get rid of the 5th of the A. I can get, the E. I can get rid of the 5th of the A. And by the same token, the D and the G. Bye-bye. Does it still sound good? It does. In fact, it does the same thing. The thirds and the sevenths contract and create that beautiful voice leading. It's very efficient. It's a fractional chord. I'm only using 2 voices. Well, remember we said jazz musicians love to have extra voices in their chords, so that's a very rich D minor 11 chord. And here's my G7 chord. That's G13. It's thick and chocolatey, but I don't really want to play all those voices. So using that same tip-off that we kind of just learned from the last series, I know that what I can do is I can get rid of the root of the D. Turns out I don't need it. The 5th of the D. And right away, I'm down to a beautiful 4 voices. And then I'll do the same thing over here on the G chord. I can get rid of the root and the 5th. And I'm down to 4 voices. So what I've got now, and just look down at the keyboard, now I've got this kind of interesting sound. Here's my 7th, 3rd, 11th, and if I want it, 9th. That's a really interesting sounding D11, minor 11. Pretty sound. And we could voice it any way we'd like, I suppose, right? The G could be down here. That's a pretty chord. In fact, let's use that voicing. Here we go. All right, now exactly the same trick for the G chord. Well, we know that the G is going to go down into the bass, and I know I need a 3rd. There's the 13th. There's the 7th. And there's the 9th up on top. I suppose I could do it this way if I wanted it to kind of appear smooth next to the D chord. So what does that look like? It looks like this. And now I've got kind of an interesting set of voicings. These are dense, crunchy voicings that are using the rule of parsimony to create fractional chords. Well, I learned drills like this. Here's my D minor 9 chord. There's no D in that. I've got a 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th. Here's my G13 chord. There's no G and no D in that. There's the 7th, 9th, 3rd, and 13th. I learned all of my 2/5s this way. I would basically just break everything down into pairs. That sound followed by that sound. The voices are really close together. In fact, if you look at it, the only voice that moves is right there. Fractional chords have a way of creating easy to sort of follow lines within the chord voicings. So if I go back to this chord progression that I've played there and do it using this trick, here's my D minor 7, G7, E minor 7, A7, D minor 7, G, E minor 7, A7. And everything is tightly packed, closely together. I've thrown away the root and the 5th, and I've created a parsimonious fractional chord. Parsimonious fractional chord. It's a lot of words, but it's a great approach to harmonizing and kind of creating efficient chords. Fractional chords are a powerful way to conceive of our harmonies. You don't need all the notes in the chord. In fact, I would argue that sometimes you're better off restricting your voicings. Probably the hardest notes to manage in a chord are the 3rd and the 7th. They have a lot of energy. They want to go a certain place. And if you can train yourself to be disciplined with where they need to go and what they want to do, they'll do 85% of the work of creating a great arrangement for you. Thirds and sevenths are really the engine of functional harmony. And as such, they can be the thing that's there. You might have a bass note. Well, once you get that sorted, you can begin to add the twiddly bits, the stuff that's all around it, the extra notes that create kind of that richness and the umami flavor in the chords. But begin with fractional chords. Begin with bits and bobs, just the simplest part of the chord, the most important part of the chord, in order to get that energy flowing in a direction that is going to serve your arrangement. For me, it always flows from the melody, and so I'm asking myself the question, okay, is that a chord tone? Is it the third and the seventh? It might be, in which case you got to think carefully about what the harmony is doing. If it's not, how can I make the thirds and the sevenths of my chord work to move to the next thing? Well, I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe, ding the bell. You'll be notified when I do my videos. I'll see you next time.